Chapter 6. Nim woke up thinking about Alex Rover's raft. You can't hammer two coconuts together, she decided, but if I had a thin piece of board and lined the coconuts up in rows, I could hammer a nail through the board and into the coconuts. But coconuts are hard to hold still while you hammer. They roll around so that sometimes you hit the wrong thing. Ouch! Nim yelled. So loud and so often, Fred went to sulk in his cave in case it was his fault. After 2 hours, she had a black and blue thumb and a pile of coconuts for lunch, and one unsmashed coconut. Let's go and see Chica, said Nim. Chica was resting on the damp sand watching the tide go out. She blinked happily when she saw what her friends were carrying. Chica's favourite game was coconut football. That was what Nim called it, because football was the only ball game she'd seen a picture of, and because nobody else had ever thought of a name for a game with a girl, a sea lion, a turtle and an iguana all trying to be the first to get the floating coconut to shore. There were no rules, except that Selkie wasn't supposed to pull Fred's tail, and Chica wasn't supposed to sit on the coconut underwater. Selkie cheated a lot. Chica, she didn't cheat that much, but when she did, she was very good. So Nim threw the coconut into the water, and Fred dashed at it because he was the fastest and best at guessing where it would land, and Selkie sneaked under him and splashed the nut across the sea. Then she tried to throw Fred across the sea too. But Nim saw her and shouted, and while Selkie was trying to look innocent, Chica grabbed the coconut. She tucked it tight under her strong turtle chin and didn't even notice everyone tickling and pulling and wrestling and shoving. She towed them all towards the beach, and when she got to the edge of the water, she sank to the bottom with the coconut under her and wouldn't move. And since no one could move Chica, if she didn't want them to, that was the end of the game. Oh, it's a tie, said Nim. Chica can't say she won if the coconut's still in the water, so it's 0-0. Chica looked as smug as a green turtle can look and didn't seem to mind at all. Late in the afternoon, Nim walked around to Keyhole Cove to check the coconuts. All 20 were still bobbing cheerfully around the cove, bumping and floating loose and free. Oh, I've got it! Nim shouted. From Jack Rousseau at explorer.net to akaincognito.net. Date, Saturday the 3rd of April, 1820. Dear Alex Rover, I've been thinking about how you could make a raft. Hammering coconuts onto a board definitely doesn't work because the shells break, and if it didn't break right away, I think the bits would fall off later, and then the raft might sink. What if you put the coconuts in a sort of bag? How would you make the bag? Where are you going on the raft? From Nim. From aka at incognito.net to Jack Rousseau at explorer.net. Date, Saturday the 3rd of April, 1323. Dear Nim, I feel like a queen bee, lazing while you buzz. A bag raft sounds perfect now. I just need a reason for Hero to find a large sack on a deserted tropical island, or maybe the bad guys stick him in a sack when they throw him overboard, as long as they don't tie it up too well. My hero's going to a tiny Pacific island where, faster than a shopper at a half-price sale, he'll set off again to rescue the lady hero. I'll be sitting at home, snug as a snail in a shell. I've attached a map that I've drawn for the story. Click on the paperclip icon. With best wishes, Alex. Nim clicked. She stared at the map on the wall, and the map on the screen, and the map on the wall again. Jack liked maps. He drew maps of their island, the currents around it and the places where they'd sailed. And because their island wasn't on the big map of the world, he'd drawn it on that too, near the crossing of the two lines, the one going round the world in the middle like a belt, and the up and down lines curving with the shape of the earth. This is the hero's island, Nim whispered. And that must mean... Selkie, Fred, she shouted. Alex Rover's been to our island. I think, she added a little while later. It took a long time to go to sleep that night. Next morning, Nim sang her way through the weeding, the digging and the picking. She hummed as she measured and marked her charts, and she sang so loudly when she climbed Lookout Palm to check for sails that a seagull dropped his fish. "That's what we'll do today," said Nim, and she slid down the tree. She got her fishing rod and met Fred and Selkie at Turtle Beach. Chica was grazing the seaweed just where the water started to get deep. Selkie didn't like Nim to swim out deep, but she let her dive and visit for just a minute. Fred stayed with Chica to see if she'd find an interesting sea plant he'd never eaten before. Selkie chased Nim back and went out deeper to fish, and Nim climbed up the rocks where she'd left her rod. The rod was bamboo, strong and springy. Jack had made it for her birthday and taught her to cast the line in a whistling arc. The best part of fishing, Nim thought. That was why she hated getting a fish first go. It was like finishing a ball game after one catch. 7 tries this time, and then a fish dancing silver on the end of her line. It was a good one to eat, the right size. "Sorry, fish," said Nim, and she killed it quickly. That was the part she didn't like. Selkie did, though. No matter how far away or how deep she was swimming, she always knew the instant that Selkie had caught something. "Wait," Nim ordered, but it was hard for Selkie to be patient when fish were being cleaned, and she was waiting for the guts and the bits that Nim didn't want. When the fish had cleaned and Selkie had stopped barking for more, Nim wrapped it in leaves and built a bonfire on the beach. She dragged some falling down branches and driftwood into a pile and used dry palm leaves for kindling. When Nim and Jack had a fire at night, they used matches, but matches were precious because they came on the supply ship, so in the daytime they used glass and the sun's own fire. She unscrewed the lens of her spyglass. She pointed it so that the sun shone a bright beam on her kindling, and the brown patch grew and glowed, and a small flame sparked on the dry palm fronds, caught the small branches and began to roar. Then she dropped a sweet potato into the hot coals and toasted her fish on a long stick. After lunch they all lay on the edge of the beach. The tide rippled over them, and when it started to float them away, they moved further up. Nim got a book and read with her legs in the water and the rest of her on the sand. And every few minutes she looked up to watch for sails and wait for email time. From jack.rousseau@explorer.net to aka.incognito.net. Date, Sunday the 4th of April, 1826. Dear Alex Rover, I have never been so excited in my whole life. Well, at least not since Fred learned to climb on my shoulders when I whistled. Are you really the hero? And have you been to our island? Because your map is exactly like our map, and your hero's island is exactly where our island is. Is that how you knew what Keyhole Cove looked like? And Turtle Beach? Are you going to come back? From Nim. From aka@incognito.net to jackrousseau@explorer.net. Date, Sunday the 4th of April, 1329. Dear Nim, this is as crazy wonderful as, well, I can't think of anything as crazy and wonderful as an author making up an island and then emailing someone who lives there. I'll tell you how it happened. I made up a story about a brave hero and a beautiful lady hero who sail around the world doing good things for science. To make the story exciting, I made up some bad guys who stole the boat, kidnapping Lady Hero and threw Hero overboard. But because the story needs a happy ending, I made up an island for him to land on, where he could build a raft and sail after the bad guys to rescue Lady Hero. So I looked on a map and I made a dot where there was an ocean current to help him drift to the island, where the weather was warm enough for coconuts to grow, and where it seemed like a good place for a volcano to have grown into the island long ago. Will you be my island's eye and tell me what you see? Because I haven't been there, Nim, and I'm not hero enough to ever go. All the best, Alex. Chapter 7. From the top of Fire Mountain you could feel like a frigate bird, floating strong on the wind and seeing everywhere you wanted to see. You could see the island shore and the beaches and the grassland and the cliffs and the rocks and the forest. You could see far, far over the sea every way that it rolled to the ends of the earth. Early next morning Nim whistled for Fred and hugged Selkie goodbye. I'll be careful, she promised. Then she checked that her spyglass was round her neck to look for Jack. She dropped a notebook and a pencil into her pocket to write things down for Alex, packed 2 bananas, a piece of coconut, a pancake bread, and her bamboo cup into her backpack for a picnic along the way, and she set off to climb Fire Mountain. She stopped at the pool to fill her cup and shoved its bamboo lid back on tight. Then she climbed on up past the top of the waterfall, following the creek through the tangling vines and flying, munching flowers. The air steamed sweet and sweat dribbled. "Get down and walk, Fred," said Nim, but Fred liked being carried, and he sprayed a cool saltwater sneeze across her neck. "Okay," she said, "but we'll stop for a rest." The creek was shallow and warm, but they flopped in and it trickled over their hot bodies. Nim lay on her back and peeled her banana. Fred stared at the coconut. "Later," said Nim. Fred tried to sulk, but was too hot to bother. They climbed higher and the ground was gravelly and black. The plants had grey spikes and the creek disappeared. Then there were no plants at all, just bubbling steams and the rotten egg smell of the hissing stones, but 100 times stronger. "Whew!" Nim coughed, and Fred sneezed a pathetic spray. Long, long ago, the top of Fire Mountain had been a round green peak. Then, one rumbling, earth-shaking day, it had poured out its heart of boiling, rolling, melting lava, and the round green peaks had been blown away. Now the top of the mountain was a sharp grey point, with a great smoky crater yawning below. Nim wanted to look down into the crater, but the cloud of steam was too thick to see through and too choking to breathe. And the longer she stood on the rocks, the hotter they got. So she had to hop on one foot and then on the other, and then she had to run out of the smoke and away from the heat to the very top of the mountain. She sat down and Fred climbed off her shoulder and they both took a deep breath. "Whew." "Picnic?" asked Nim, and they shared the coconut and the water. Then Nim ate her bread and her other banana and looked all around. No matter which way or how far her spyglass stared, the ocean was empty. There were no white sails or anything else that could be Jack's boat, nothing but a frigate bird winging steadily out to the western sea. "Maybe he'll bring me another message," thought Nim. But first she was going to be Alex's Island Eye. Far below her was the top of the frigate bird cliffs, then Turtle Beach's pale gold sand, the grasslands and the shell beach, the hut onto the sea lion point and Keyhole Cove, and finally the grim black lava rocks that stretched all the way back to the far edge of Frigate Bird Cliffs. The island was built in layers, Nim thought. Beach and rock, grassland and rainforest, and last of all, the rocky Fire Mountain cone. She picked up her notebook and pencil, but before she could start to write, the ground began to tremble. Then the earth roared and the mountain bellowed and an explosion of red covered the sky. A fountain of lava, red and bubbling, shot up from the middle of the crater. Red and gold stars, hot and bubbling, sprayed over the mountain top. It was like the wildest storm when wind and rain crash and great surf waves thunder, except that the wind, the rain and the waves were all made of fire. Fred was a streak of grey flying over the rock, and Nim's legs followed him as she ran for her life down the side of the hot gravel cone. But the gravel was deep and crumbly, and Nim's foot twisted and she rolled and skidded and tumbled down the mountain. She picked herself up and went on running. She met Fred by the creek where they'd had their first rest, and they splashed on through and ran some more. Nim's breath came in jagged chunks. She was so hot she thought the flames might spurt out of her head like her own miniature volcano. And just when they couldn't run any further, they splashed into the waterfall's cold water and whooshed gently down to the pool. They sat in it for one refreshing moment and then ran the rest of the way back to the hut. Selkie was waiting anxiously on the rock. She barked when she saw them, sniffed Nim all over and whiffed sadly when she found the cut on her knee. It was a big, messy cut, with torn skin, deep gravel in the grooves, and lots of blood. Nim must have done it when she tumbled down the mountain, but was too scared to feel it. It hurt now, and she wasn't so scared. Nim stretched out on the rock and let Selkie fuss. She stared up, and the fire mountain was still shooting scarlet stars and a glow of red on the grey cone. but the lava hadn't followed them, and they were safe at home. But she hadn't seen Jack's sails, and he wouldn't be home tonight, which meant there was one more thing she had to do. She took her fishing rod back to the rocks, and when she caught a fish, she dropped it into a bucket. Because sometimes Galileo came when he was called, and sometimes he didn't. But he always came if he saw a fish. Dear Jack, today I climbed Fire Mountain to see if you were coming, but you weren't. I didn't do any science measurements or write anything down because the volcano erupted when we were at the top. If you think Fred can move fast for coconuts, you should see how fast he ran away from the exploding volcano. I think I can see Galileo now, so I say goodbye. Love, as much as Chica loves football, Nim. A frigate bird came closer, and it was Galileo, so Nim danced the fish in the air and called his name. Galileo swooped low and stayed long enough for her to pull out the letter that was tucked into the band and stick hers in instead. Thank you, Nim called as the big bird soared up to his nest on the cliffs. She unrolled Jack's letter. Dear Nim, worked out the best way of fixing the rudder is to drill a hole through the tip. Not easy underwater. Pass a rope through the hole and steer with a rope. Have drilled the hole, but had to jump out before I could get the rope through it. Sharks around here must have tasted the chunk I lost of my forehead in the storm, thought it was jaw-snapping yum, and wanted to chomp the rest. Soon as they forget about me, I'll get the rope through and be on my way home. But the storm blew me a long way away, so it'll take a couple of days. Love, as much as sails loved wind, Jack. Nim read the letter, and she read it again. And even though Jack had tried to make it funny, she felt more lonely and miserable than she ever had before. Even writing a long email to tell Alex Rover all about Fire Mountain didn't make her feel better. Chapter 8. While Jack was waiting for the sharks to disappear and hoping that he could fix his rudder and worrying about Nim, he saw a ship. Jack danced a jig and sang a song because he wanted to get home even more than he didn't want to be rescued. His song didn't rhyme and it didn't have a tune, but it said, I'll be home, I'll see Nim tomorrow, the plankton can wait, and everything will be all right. The ship came closer. It was a cruise ship, a pink and purple cruise ship. It was the Tropo Tourists. Jack stopped dancing and stopped singing. His face was pale and his stomach was sick. But Nim had been alone too long, and he knew what he had to do. In the cabin he found the flags he'd never used, one with blue and white checks and the other striped. When he put them up together, they said SOS, come and rescue me, to any sailor who saw them. Then he waited. The longer he waited, the more he didn't want the Tropo tourists to see the island. He didn't want to talk to them and didn't want them oohing and ahhing and taking pictures of his home. But the longer he waited, the more he didn't want Nim to be alone. The sad flags fluttered from the mast and he went on waiting. But the Tropo tourists sailed out of sight. Early next afternoon, when Nim was sitting in a palm tree to watch for Jack, the ship came to the island. Just a speck in the distance. So Nim cheered and thought how she would run to the furthest point of Keyhole Cove and blow her shell whistle and shout, Jack needs help! Look for a boat with a broken rudder! Then, through a spyglass, she saw the colours and she knew that she could never ever call out to this ship, because no matter how much she wanted Jack to be home now, what she wanted even more was for him to be happy, and he'd never be happy if the Tropo tourists came to the island. And even though they didn't know it was Jack's island, if they passed the blue waters of Keyhole Cove or the peaceful sands of Turtle Beach, they'd know it was the most beautiful island in the world. They'd come back with curious tourists and fill up the island with holiday and noise. Oh no, they won't, said Nim. She raced to the hut and turned on the laptop. From Jack Rousseau at Explorer.net to aka at Incognito.net. Date, Tuesday the 6th of April, 1414. Dear Alex, I hope it's okay to write so early, but could you please tell me right away what your hero would do if the bad guys were coming to his island and he wanted them to go away and not notice it? From Nim. From aka@incognito.net to jackrousseau@explorer.net. Date Tuesday the 6th of April 917. Dear Nim, it's okay to write any time, and it doesn't have to be about the coconuts, unless your parents have another rule. When my beautiful lady hero was escaping from the bad guys at sunset, she disguised herself in old clothes and grease till she looked so ugly they didn't notice her. But a whole island is trickier. Somehow, the hero would have to make the rock seem more dangerous, the reef more terrifying, and the pale sands bleak and lonely. Make the whole island seem like a creepy, scary place. This sounds like an exciting game. Your friend, Alex. This ship was coming closer. Nim would have to work fast to disguise the island. The sea lions were on the rocks, coughing, barking, honking, all the usual sea lion conversations, but Nim interrupted, shouting and waving her arms. Selkie swam after her, barking reproachfully. The ship came closer still. It was slowing down. It had seen the island. "Bad boat!" Nim screamed. Selkie looked confused. The other sea lion stared. "Shoo!" Nim shouted. "Get off the rocks!" Grumbling and grunting, they slid into the water. Nim dived in after them, but Selkie blocked her before she'd gone 3 strokes. "I'll go back," Nim pleaded, "if you stop the boat." So when Nim was safely on the shore, Selkie headed the other sea lions out to the reef. The ship stopped and lowered a small boat down to the water. Creeping slow out of sight of snooping binoculars, Nim jumped into the tidal pool and snatched up armfuls of Iguana's favourite seaweed. The small boat cast off with a snarl of its motor, and the king of the sea lions bellowed back. If a boat found its way through the maze of the reef, Shell Beach would be the first thing it would see. Crawling across the pebbly rocks and sharp white shells, the blood flowing red from the cut on her knee, Nim threw handfuls of seaweed from one end of the beach to the other. Fred followed, nibbling as fast as she could put it down. "You can have coconuts," she promised him, "if you'll bring all your friends to the beach." Fred looked at her. "Okay, as many coconuts as you can eat," Nim said. With a sneeze of surprise, Fred scuttled away from rock to rock, tidal pool to sea, until the beach was covered by spiny iguanas munching free seaweed. From the reef, it would look like a beach of bumpy grey rocks, and maybe they would turn round before they saw Turtle Beach. Nim sneaked back to her lookout palm, shimmied to the top and clung high and still. The boat had nearly reached the first gap in the reef. It was close enough for Nim to see the people inside, wearing pink t-shirts and purple caps with stuffed fish on top. Suddenly, the gap disappeared. In a swirling, thrashing sea lion storm, the boat idled on past, looking for another place to get through, but the sea lions followed. The king roared his roar, and the others bellowed, splashing and sprayed higher, and the boat rocked wildly and was slowly, ferociously pushed out to sea. From her tree, Nim could see something else. Galileo was circling the boat. Galileo had never seen pretend fish before. Galileo's rule was if it looked like a fish, it was a fish. And if someone else had fish, well, Galileo would steal it. He called to his mate, and they dived together to snatch 2 fish caps from the heads in the boat. The people screamed and swore, throwing their arms over their faces, but the giant birds only cared about the caps. They spat the first one out into the sea, snatched 2 more to see if they tasted better. Now the boat jolted, tipping hard as if it had hit a rock. "Please don't get hurt," Nim begged the sea lions. The boat steadied. Its engine roared and shot it back across the water. The tide was going out. By the time the little boat had been lifted onto the ship, the reef was jagged above the water. So the tropo tourists cruised on past, but they didn't go away. They went as slow and as close as they dared. Past Turtle Beach and round the point of the Frigate Bird Cliffs. Nim crept down to the beach and tried not to cry. Chica lumbered up from the water, a smug look on her face and purple paint across her shell. Nim remembered the jolt. "Did you hit them?" she asked, scratching under the turtle's chin. Chica looked smugger. "Everyone tried but me," thought Nim. "It stinks." Turtle Bay stank too. Stank worse than a bad day at the Hissing Stones. "Ugh," said Nim. Half a dead shark had washed up on the tide. No one would land if they could smell that, said Nim, and wondered if Alex Ross's hero would use a rotten shark to fight for his island. She sprinted to the hut and grabbed her wagon, dumped the shark, slimy and rotting. It was a long, puffing haul to Hissing Stones, but Nim would have pulled it to the top of Fire Mountain if she had to. The stream was drifting out to sea. It wasn't an extra stinky day, but I'll fix that, said Nim. She dragged the shark out of the wagon and across the biggest vent, where the steam hissed out between the stones. The steam stopped coming out and the shark didn't smell any worse than it had before. What else stinks? Nim wondered. Sometimes seaweed washed up on black rocks, and if it didn't dry out and it didn't wash away, after a while it began to rot. Nim scrambled up and collected shirtfuls of putrid sea muck. She poked her head round the point. The ship was cruising past the breakers where the black rocks met the reef. Nim clutched her seaweed and tumbled down the boulders to Hissing Stones. The shark smelled so bad now. She wanted to vomit, but she dumped the seaweed onto the steaming vents and ran back to hide, out of the stench, out of sight. The ship rounded the point. For a long, long moment, nothing happened. Nim had dumped so much muck that no steaming stink could escape. It was too late to do anything else. The ship was across from Sea Lion Point, right in line with the Hissing Stones. The shark exploded. The rotting seaweed fountained. The built-up steam sprayed bits of rotten shark and seaweed, and Nim didn't know what in a rushing geyser far into the air. The gentle breeze wafting out to sea turned into a grey, choking, sick-making fog. The ship turned and steamed out of sight. That evening, Nim was so tired she couldn't eat, and she felt so cold and empty inside and was so hot and icky outside that she took her torch and towel and went up to the pool. Nim loved the ocean because it was always there, wherever she looked and as far as she could see, but it was too huge and powerful to understand and too dangerous to trust. The pool was easy to love because it was so small that she knew every rock in it, and so peaceful she could float peacefully as the sky got darker and the moons and stars came out, while the muck and muddling washed away.